You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Wednesday show talking about a recent blog article from K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. Roger, thanks for joining us today.
Good to be with you, Shelby.
Roger, this recent blog article titled An Electronic Identification Mandate for the Cattle Industry, and something that started way back in 1995.
Yeah, it actually goes back that far. That's when the U.S. entered the WTO, the World Trade Organization, when it was formed back in 1995. And the express purpose at that time, Shelby, of the WTO was to increase imports and exports globally around the world. And when the WTO was formed and the U.S. joined it, there were recommendations made at that time for nations to adopt animal ID procedures to track disease in animals as a means to facilitate trade. So it was seen as a trade promotion type effort. Animal ID would help advance trade across the world. And in the U.S., then, efforts concerning animal ID started in 1999, but really accelerated in 2002.
There was a development from that then in 2010.
Yeah, we fast forward then to 2010, and that's when the USDA announced that it was abandoning a system that it had initially put in place, known as the NAIS, or the National Animal Identification System, which at that point in time, that came in basically in 2002. That contained mandatory registration of premises and exclusive use of electronic ID devices, or EID, ear tags on all classes of cattle from birth to slaughter by cattle farmers and ranchers. That proved to be extraordinarily unpopular, and so that was abandoned. Of course, USDA didn't give up on this. They came back in 2010 saying that, well, yes, we're abandoning NAIS and we're proposing in its place a new system known as Animal Disease Traceability, or ADT, and that was designed to be a state-administered program allowing the states as well as tribes to choose their own degree of animal identification and traceability of livestock populations inside their borders. I think the government recognized at that point in time that we can't have a federal program unless we have interstate commerce that's involved. So the states are the ones under the Constitution that regulate the commerce inside their states. So let's have a state-run program, state by state, that doesn't involve interstate commerce. And that was the way they went at this in 2010. But they did say one thing: a state program would be subject to the USDA requirement that all animals moving interstate in interstate commerce have a form of ID that allows traceback to their point of origin. So once it crosses a state line, then the feds can impose their system. But if it's purely intrastate, stays inside the state, then the Commerce Clause is not invoked. That's a state program.
2010 isn't the only development they've had. Also had a final rule in 2013 before we get to where we are now.
That's right. That new approach that they announced in 2010, it took 3 years to get a final rule published in 2013 that requires adult cattle that are shipped interstate to be affixed with an official animal ID device. And that has to contain official identification number on a metal ear clip, a plastic numeric ear tag, an EID ear tag, or a group lot identification. That final rule wasn't put in place until 2013. And APHIS, which is an arm of the USDA, the Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, is the administering agency that handles this. They stated in the 2013 rule that this was to be flexible, and they said it was designed to allow producers to use tags that don't require any electronic or special equipment to read the official ear tags. And in addition to that, they were clear that you had a flexible approach, whatever fit your farm or ranch operation the best, you could use.
Does that hold true as 11 years later we have another new final rule?
Well, no, it doesn't. And in fact, that promised flexibility back in 2013, while they said that, the USDA made it clear that they were not ending APHIS's EID mandate quest to have an electronic identification mandate. And here we get to 2024, and that's what we see. And between 2013 and 2020, there were lawsuits that were involved. In fact, one important one that bears on the 24 development was in 2019, where the USDA put out a fact sheet, followed by the issuance of a notice specifying that radio frequency ID was going to be the only option going forward. That was challenged successfully in court, and they dropped it. Well, things had been quiet until recently. Beginning of 23, they came up with a proposed rule, which has now been finalized within the past 3 weeks. In fact, it was May 9 that USDA published a new final rule that officially eliminated that flexibility for producers, and any lower cost options that a producer might have. Those are now gone, and all the less burdensome requirements that were promised in 2013 are gone. And under that new rule, which becomes effective now since it's been published in the Federal Register on November 5 this year, adult cattle and bison shipped interstate have to bear an EID ear tag, and that effectively eliminates the flexibility given producers under that 2013 final rule.
And what are all those classifications of livestock that really do have to have an identification?
So the new rule specifically says that 11 million cattle will be impacted by the EID mandate. And that's an APHIS estimate based on the number of official identification ear tags that have been used in prior years. And that represents about 11 to 12% of the U.S. cattle and bison inventory that's currently out there. At least that's what I read in the Federal Register when this was posted. That's what they said. So it doesn't change the type or class of animals subject to the EID ear tag mandate from those covered under the 2013 rule. So the classes of cattle subject to the new mandate continue to include all sexually intact cattle and bison 18 months of age or over, all of your female dairy cattle of any age, and all male dairy cattle born after March 11, 2013. It also includes cattle and bison of any age that are used for rodeos, as well as for recreational events, and cattle and bison of any age used for shows or exhibition. Now, cattle and bison can be exempted from official identification requirements under both the 2013 rule and the new rule if they go directly to slaughter. So if there's no interstate connection to this, then they're exempted.
Is there still some shortcomings even with this new final rule?
Well, APHIS does recognize that themselves that there are shortcomings with the rule. They acknowledged at least 3 of those that have now been published in the Federal Register, and they acknowledge that 70% of cattle would need to be traceable for it to be fully prepared for incursion of a foreign animal disease. And as I mentioned earlier, the new rule doesn't include any additional cattle. We're about 11 to 12% of the herd, so they're not anywhere close to 70%. That's one shortcoming. They also acknowledge in the 2013 rule that the digitization of interstate certificates of veterinary inspection, or ICVIs, which have to accompany cattle and bison that are shipped interstate, they indicate they need that. That's important to timely traceability, but in the rule they don't require digitization of those records. They also acknowledge that ear tags on an animal and the accompanying ICVIs and other paper documents work in tandem, and that both are essential to the process of animal disease traceability, but you don't have that under the final rule. Finally, they also acknowledge that while they're requiring producers to buy and put the EID tags on their cattle and bison, it's not requiring anyone in the industry to purchase or even use electronic equipment needed to read and record the EID tags. So they're imposing their mandate on producers. Whether the data in those tags are ever transferred electronically to a digital data management system is purely discretionary. So I don't see how that's going to work.
Roger, are there some people that are wanting to overturn parts of this rule?
Yeah, there's a bipartisan effort in the Congress to eliminate the rule. Senator Mike Rounds out of South Dakota has introduced a bill to bar the Secretary of Ag from implementing the rule. And then you had Congresswoman Hageman from Wyoming that said she was going to try to push this through under a Congressional Review Act to overturn it. And then you have Senators Rounds and Testers out of Montana that are also pushing the Senate to pass a resolution of disapproval. So it's on both sides of the aisle. In cattle country in particular, the representatives and the senators are not happy about this.
What are some of the legal issues around it?
Well, anytime you increase transparency of the flow of livestock and you're increasing the ability to trace it back to your farm, if there's a disease outbreak, the problem is it can be traced back to you. And so that raises concerns of legal liability. And I see perhaps 3 areas of where the law could nail a producer if the problem is traced back to their farm. And that would be on a strict liability claim, perhaps on a negligence claim, and maybe based on a contract warranty type claim, whether it's non-merchantable or whether it's breached some implied warranty of fitness. So I think those possibilities are out there. There are some state exemptions for contract-based warranties in the livestock producing states, including Kansas, but those are some things we're going to have to keep an eye on.
Roger, what are some final thoughts on this electronic identification mandate in the cattle industry?
Well, I think this is just an incremental step as to what USDA has been wanting for some time, and that's mandatory RFID, basically, radio frequency IDs. And it will have a disparate impact on producers. Again, if you have packing plants in your state, your cattle don't have to cross state lines. If you don't have a packing plant in your state, such as Ohio, you've got to ship those interstate to get to a packing plant. And so the cost is going to be unduly on, say, cattlemen in Ohio than it would be on Kansas. And the question is, well, does that disparate impact raise some constitutional concerns? And it might. And another concern is, where do the chips come from? And a lot of those are produced in China. So that's going to be important to the Congress to look into that, too. Those are just a couple of things that I think are the really big issues that are out there.
That was K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. I will put a link to this blog article in today's show notes on agtoday.net.